It began with a small sound in a very large place. A click, a breath, the slip of rope through a pulley. Morning light lay across the marble of St. Peter's Basilica. Tourists walked slow, voices low. A crew had set a scaffold in a side chapel for routine cleaning. Dust covers hung like sails. A conservator in a white jacket checked the straps that held the statue of the Virgin Mary and the baby Jesus. The figure had stood there for centuries, calm above candles and flowers. No one expected what came next. The hoist took the weight. A pin that should have held did not. There was a shout, a hand reaching too late, and then the statue tipped. The first sound was a soft scrape, as if the basilica did not want to hear. Then came the fall. The figure slid, struck the edge of the pedestal, and dropped to the floor in two heavy steps. Gasps rushed through the chapel. A woman cried out. Someone whispered, "No." The statue hit the marble with a thud you could feel in your chest. Mary's robe cracked along a fold. A chip flew from the child's foot and skittered like a bead. Candles trembled, but did not go out. The conservator fell to her knees beside the figure, hands lifted but not touching, as if her palms could hold it together by will. The foreman called for space. Guards held the crowd back. Phones hovered, then lowered. The statue was life-sized, carved from pale stone in the 18th century by a careful hand. Mary's head was bowed, her eyes gentle. The child held close, one small hand at her collar. The surface had softened where pilgrims had looked and looked again. Flowers often sat at the base. Today, their scent of lilies and wax mixed with dust and fear. The conservator breathed steady and spoke to the team. "We will lift together, slowly." Padded boards slid under the figure. Straps were looped. A rolling frame came in, its wheels whispering on the stone. Every motion felt like a prayer. The statue was not shattered, only wounded. A hairline split ran from a fold of Mary's robe across her wrist and down to the child's heel. A second, finer crack crossed the base like a thread. Then someone saw it. Along the main split, inside the stone, there was darkness that was not shadow. The conservator leaned close, a light in her hand. The crack was shallow near the surface, then opened to a narrow hollow. And within that hollow, something pale lay pressed, not stone at all. It looked like folded paper sealed into the heart of the figure. A dull bead of metal glinted beside it. "Stop," she said softly. "Do not move it more." The priest of the chapel arrived with a face white as wax. He nodded, voice low. "We will treat this with care." The guards cleared more space. The crowd stepped back, and the great church seemed to exhale. They eased the statue onto the padded frame and covered it with clean linen. Small markers were placed along the fracture, numbered as if counting breaths. A lamp on the floor sent light up the stone. Under it, the pale sliver inside the crack grew clearer. It was not dust. It was paper, folded tight, the edges browned with age and faintly curled. Word traveled faster than footsteps. In minutes, a murmur moved through the aisles. "There is something inside. They found it when it cracked." Tourists who had come to see domes and bronze now stood with hands clasped, eyes on a simple sheet. The father did not answer. He stared like a man listening for a sound he could not yet hear. The team decided to move the statue to a workroom within the Vatican museums. The path was short but long in feeling. They rolled slowly, guided by guards. Under the great dome, the air seemed cooler. Inside, time slowed. In the workroom, the linen was lifted. The crack looked larger, but the statue still held. Soft supports were set under arms and head. The conservator spoke softly. "You are safe. We will not hurry." A tiny camera on a cable was threaded into the opening. On a monitor, the inside appeared. Gray-white at first, then shadow, then the pale stack again. The camera moved closer. The stack was not one sheet, but many, each folded to a narrow spine. Beside them lay a thin cord and a small ring of wooden beads. The priest crossed himself. The conservator's hands did not shake, but her eyes shone. "This was deliberate," she said, "placed when it was made, or long ago." The hollow was not a flaw. It had been carved on purpose and sealed. Late morning rolled to noon. A custodian set a small vase nearby. The room settled into a hush. Outside the door, people gathered in a quiet line. A guard promised news when there was news. Some whispered prayers. A few had tears they could not explain. Inside, the team planned the next step. The statue would be braced. The opening would be widened by a hair. The contents would be removed one by one, documented, and kept safe. The conservator wrote a note. "Found within fracture, folded papers, cord, wooden rosary." She dated it and signed her name small. Before they began, the priest asked for a moment. He stood by the head of the figure and spoke a few words. "Mother, we did not mean this harm. Guide our hands. Let what is hidden help us." It was simple and true. The conservator nodded. The work went on. Minute by minute, the shock became more than loss. The fall had cracked stone, yes, but it had also opened a door no one knew was there. In the largest church in the world, on a normal morning, the heart of a statue had spoken, not with sound, but with the quiet promise of paper, cord, and beads resting where no eye had looked for centuries. We were watching. The statue lay in the conservation room, wrapped in linen and cradled in foam supports. The fall had silenced the Basilica for a day, but word had already spread far beyond its walls. Headlines circled the globe. "Statue of Virgin Mary and child cracks in St. Peter's Basilica." Hidden contents discovered inside. Crowds pressed against the barriers outside, whispering, pointing, waiting. Inside, the atmosphere was slower, heavy, filled with the soft scrape of tools and the low murmur of prayer. The conservator, Maria Antonelli, prepared her team. They wore gloves and masks, not because of dust, but because of reverence. Every step was documented with photographs, notes, and careful sketches. They worked under bright white lamps that threw the hollow into sharp relief. Through the crack, the folded papers glowed faintly, their edges browned, their fibers fragile but intact. The rosary beads lay twisted, the cord faded to the color of sand. The first task was stabilization. Small metal arms braced the fracture, stopping it from spreading. Thin pads were slid into the gaps, holding the weight so that the stone would not shift as they reached inside. Maria bent close, breathing steady. "This statue has kept a secret for centuries," she said softly. "Let us honor it by being patient." They widened the opening by less than a millimeter, shaving the edge carefully with a scalpel. A tiny suction tube removed stone dust. The crack yawned just enough for tweezers to slip through. The first object touched was not paper, but the beads. They lifted them out slowly, laying them on a cloth. Gasps rose from those present. The rosary was old, carved from a wood dark with age. The beads were uneven, clearly hand-shaped. The crucifix at the end was tiny, the edges worn smooth from use. The priest stepped closer. "These were prayed on," he said, "by hands long gone." He touched the air above them, not daring to make contact. The beads seemed to hold the warmth of voices that had whispered over them hundreds of years before. Next came the parchment. Maria eased one folded sheet through the gap. It crackled faintly, but did not fall apart. She laid it flat on the table, brushing away flecks of dust. Sealed wax clung to one edge. An emblem was faint but visible, the mark of the parish that had stood in Rome in the 18th century. She held her breath. "This is original," she whispered, "sealed at the time of the statue's creation." It took an hour to remove the rest. There were 5 sheets in total, folded and sealed. Each was fragile, yet whole. When placed side by side, they looked like the heart of the statue laid open. The team worked in silence, documenting every angle before the priest gave a nod. It was time to read. They opened the first sheet under glass. The Latin script was elegant, flowing, written with ink that had faded to brown but was still legible. The words told a story. It was the testimony of the sculptor, Lorenzo Bernardi, written in his own hand. He described how he was chosen to carve the statue in 1725, after the town had survived a famine that left many dead. The people had prayed to the Virgin for relief. When rain finally came and crops grew again, they vowed to commission a statue to place within St. Peter's itself. Lorenzo wrote of how he worked. He fasted. He prayed before touching the chisel each day. He wrote, "I carved her eyes last, for I feared to meet her gaze too soon. When I did, I wept. She looked not at me, but into me." He explained the hollow inside the statue. It was intentional. "I leave this chamber as a vessel to carry the prayers of the faithful. Let it be sealed, so that as long as the Virgin stands, the cries of the people will be held within her." The second sheet contained the words of the parish priest of that time, Father Giacomo. He listed the names of families who had survived the famine and those who had not. He described the vow made in the square when the people swore, "If you save us, we will keep you here forever." He placed his signature at the bottom and added, "These prayers are not for us, but for our children's children. Let them know we remembered them." Tears ran down cheeks in the room as the words were read aloud. Even the technicians paused in their notes. The silence was filled not with emptiness, but with the weight of voices that had been carried for 300 years. The third sheet was different. It contained personal prayers, written by hand but not signed. Pleas for food, for safety, for forgiveness. One line read, "Holy Mother, "Let my child live to see spring." Another said, "Take my hunger, only let my wife be spared." Each voice was raw, plain, filled with the ache of survival. The priest's hands shook as he held the translation. "These were their secrets," he said softly, "and now we are their witnesses." The fourth sheet was smaller, folded into a square. When opened, it revealed a sketch. Mary with the child, drawn in hurried lines. At the bottom was written in faint ink, "So that I may see what I carve." It was Lorenzo's study, placed inside as a seed of the finished work. The people in the room leaned close, staring at the rough but tender lines. It was like looking at the statue's first heartbeat. The fifth and final sheet was unlike the others. It was shorter, written with certainty. It read simply, "If this statue should ever fall, it will not be ruin, but revelation. For what is sealed here is not stone, but love. Do not be afraid." The Latin phrase mirrored the words that had been uncovered in the painting in another time and place. "Noli timere." Do not be afraid. The room was still. Maria laid her hands on the table, head bowed. The priest wept openly now, his shoulders shaking. A guard crossed himself. Even those who did not believe in miracles felt the hair rise on their arms. The discovery spread quickly. News anchors repeated the words on television. Historians pored over the documents, confirming the ink, the seals, the dates. Some argued it was symbolic, nothing more. But for the faithful, it was a message across centuries, breaking open in the moment the statue cracked. That night, the fragments of the statue rested under guard. The letters were placed in protective glass, the beads in a soft-lined case. Yet many said the room itself smelled faintly of roses, though no flowers had been brought in. A guard swore he heard faint whispering as he passed the door, like prayers caught in the stone. Crowds gathered outside again the next day. Some demanded to see the relics. Others simply knelt in the square, whispering their own prayers into the air. The Basilica bells rang, long and low, carrying across Rome. The statue, wounded but whole, had revealed not emptiness, but a heart filled with voices that still spoke. The morning after the parchments were read aloud, the square outside St. Peter's Basilica looked like a festival, but quieter. Thousands gathered not with banners or music, but with candles and folded slips of paper. Families came from across Rome, some traveling all night. Tourists who had meant to see art and domes found themselves pressed into vigils that felt like history in motion. From the steps of the basilica, the air shimmered with whispers. The statue that had fallen had become more alive, broken than whole. Inside the conservation hall, the atmosphere was different. Work lamps buzzed. Gloves snapped. Every surface smelled faintly of old paper and incense. The parchment sheets lay under glass, each preserved now with care. The rosary beads rested nearby, their cord frayed but unbroken. A wooden carving, found lodged deeper in the cavity during further cleaning, had been revealed late in the night. It was small, no larger than a hand, but carved with exquisite care. Mary holding the child, her face bowed, the child's hand raised. The wood was dark, worn smooth in places, as though it had been touched by countless fingers. The conservator believed it predated the marble statue by centuries. Its style suggested it had once belonged to a traveler from the East or a pilgrim who had crossed seas. The priest leaned close to it, his eyes wet. "This was the heart," he whispered. "They placed her heart inside her." Historians examined the carving and agreed it likely came from an earlier shrine, perhaps carried by the first families who had settled near Rome after long journeys. For them, the marble statue had been a vessel, not just stone, but a container for all that came before. As the news spread, the meaning deepened. This was not just a crack in marble. It was a window into the faith of people who had lived and died long ago. It was a message across centuries, hidden in silence until the fall revealed it. That afternoon, the parchments were read publicly in the Basilica Square. The words of Lorenzo Bernardi, the sculptor, echoed across the crowd. "I leave this chamber as a vessel to carry the prayers of the faithful. Let it be sealed, so that as long as the Virgin stands, the cries of the people will be held within her." People wept openly. Children clutched their parents' hands. The rosary beads were shown in a glass case, lifted high for all to see. When the wooden carving was displayed, the crowd gasped as one. Many knelt, some prayed, some only stared in silence. Even skeptics lowered their voices. One tourist, an engineer by trade, muttered, "I don't believe in miracles, but this feels like standing inside one." The Vatican announced the statue would be restored, but not closed. The contents found inside would remain displayed beside it. The cracks would not be erased, but stabilized, left visible as scars that told the story. "She fell," the priest said, "but she did not fall in vain." In the weeks that followed, the square never emptied. Pilgrims came by bus, on foot, in wheelchairs. They lit candles until the steps glowed like stars. They left notes, folded tight, adding new prayers to the old ones revealed. Volunteers gathered them carefully, promising they would be preserved with the others. The faint scent of roses returned night after night, noticed by many though no flowers were burned. Michael, a young man from Milan, who had come out of curiosity, returned often. He had once mocked the faithful, but now he found himself kneeling, words failing him. Each time he looked at the cracked robe of the Virgin, he felt less afraid of his own wounds. "Do not be afraid," he whispered, repeating the line written in the final parchment. He felt it seep into him like water. Scholars wrote essays, pointing to history and craft. They explained how the sculptor might have known of older practices of sealing prayers in statues. They spoke of continuity, of faith expressed through material form. But even they admitted the timing was uncanny. 3 centuries of silence, broken only now, in this fall, in this moment. The city changed with it. Arguments in the streets seemed smaller. Families, once divided by silence, stood together in line to see the statue's fragments. Tourists stopped to light candles when before they had only rushed past. Even the workers of the Basilica, who had walked those halls every day without pause, found themselves lingering in the chapel longer, eyes lifted. When the statue was returned, restored but marked with its history, The Basilica bells rang long and low. The cracked folds of the robe were sealed with invisible supports, but the lines remained. The child's foot bore its chip, now smoothed into the story of the fall. Inside, the hollow chamber was left empty, but beside it, in cases of glass, rested the rosary, the carving, the letters. Pilgrims filed past in silence, hands brushing their hearts as they looked. The priest stood before them. His words were simple. She fell, but she revealed what she carried. It was not only stone, it was us. Our voices, our fears, our hopes. Do not be afraid. At night, the candles around the chapel flickered steady. A mother pressed her infant's hand to the glass case, whispering thanks. An old man set his cane against the wall and stood straighter than he had in years. Teenagers sat on the floor, heads bent, quiet for once. The statue was no longer just an object of devotion. It was a witness. It had carried prayers for centuries, hidden in silence, until the cracks revealed them. And now it carried new ones, offered each day by those who came to see. The legacy stretched beyond Rome. Photos of the parchments were shared online, translated into dozens of languages. The phrase, "Do not be afraid," spread across social media, painted on walls, written in notebooks, whispered in hospitals and schools. It became a line that bound strangers together. The fall had seemed like ruin, but in the breaking came a revelation. The Virgin and Child, carved in stone, had opened to show not fragility, but strength. They had carried the voices of the past and now invited the voices of the present. You don't need to believe in miracles to understand why people wept in St. Peter's Basilica. You only need to see how a crack in marble became a window into love, into memory, into hope. The statue fell, but what it revealed will never fall again. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. Yet the memory of the statue's fall never left Rome. St. Peter's Basilica, already a place of history and faith, now carried a story that touched even those who had never prayed within its walls. Pilgrims came from every corner of the world, each bringing something small, a candle, a flower, a slip of paper with words scrawled in shaky handwriting. The cracked statue, once feared ruined, stood again above the altar, its scars still visible, a silent reminder of what had been revealed. Tourists who had planned to see the grandeur of Michelangelo's dome now lingered longest in the side chapel, where Mary and the child stood. They shuffled slowly, their voices hushed, eyes drawn not just to the marble, but to the glass cases beside it. There, the hidden objects were displayed, the rosary beads, dark with age, but gleaming faintly under the lights. The wooden carving, small and tender, showing the earliest face of Mary and her son. In the parchments, unfolded and translated, each word preserved with reverence. The impact of those words was not fading. Scholars analyzed them, yes, but ordinary people felt them most deeply. The plea of a mother for her child, the vow of a parish to keep their gratitude alive, the sculptor's quiet weeping as he painted eyes into stone. These were not distant voices. They were human, raw, as though written yesterday. Visitors left the chapel with red eyes, some holding hands tighter than before, some whispering softly to themselves. The Vatican responded with care. Instead of hiding the scarred statue away, they made the decision to let it remain visible in its repaired form. "We do not erase wounds," said the cardinal at the reopening Mass. "We honor them, for through these wounds, light has entered." His words spread through Rome like the toll of a bell. Every night, vigils continued. The steps of the Basilica glowed with lines of candles, placed side by side until they looked like rivers of fire. Pilgrims sang hymns, their voices weaving together across languages. At times, the scent of roses returned, drifting softly, clinging to coats and hair. Some swore the fragrance grew strongest near the glass cases, as if the prayers sealed centuries ago still breathed through the relics. Among the pilgrims was Michael, the young man from Milan who had first come out of curiosity. Now, he came not to observe, but to sit quietly on the floor of the chapel, sometimes for hours, sometimes in tears. He told no one his full story, but those near him saw the change. His face, once tense and proud, softened each time he read the words etched in the old letters. "Do not be afraid." They became his anchor. One evening, he found himself sitting beside an older woman who had lost her husband that year. She told him, in halting Italian, how she had not entered a church since the funeral, but the story of the statue had drawn her here. "It broke," she whispered, looking at the marble figure. "And so did I, but it was not the end." Michael nodded, unable to answer. Together they sat, sharing silence that felt like prayer. Historians began publishing studies. They traced the origin of the wooden carving to the Eastern Mediterranean, possibly carried back by pilgrims in the 12th or 13th century. The rosary beads, carved from olive wood, likely came from the Holy Land as well. The parchments, tested by scientists, were confirmed as authentic 18th century documents, their ink made from oak galls and iron salts. But while scholars spoke of provenance, ordinary people spoke of presence. They did not care only where the objects came from, but what they carried. Human voices, human pain, human gratitude. The discovery began to ripple outward. Across Italy, other parishes opened their own statues, curious if they too carried secrets. Some found nothing but stone. Others uncovered medals, small relics, or scraps of paper, long forgotten. It was as if the fall in St. Peter's had reminded the world that faith was often hidden in the simplest, quietest places. Not everyone believed in miracles, but even skeptics respected what the statue had done. Newspapers that once mocked the story now published editorials about community, about memory, about the way a single moment could unite strangers. A well-known columnist wrote, "The statue fell, and we expected loss. But from its wound came voices of hope." That is not superstition. That is history speaking. Rome itself seemed gentler in those months. Strangers helped one another more often. Shops near the Basilica handed out free water to pilgrims waiting in long lines. Priests found confessionals fuller, not only with believers, but with those who had long drifted away. Many came not for absolution, but for someone to hear them, just as the Virgin had carried the hidden voices in stone. The restoration team, who had feared blame when the statue fell, were now seen as guardians. They had uncovered not failure, but treasure. Maria Antonelli, the lead conservator, gave a short statement. "We worked with our tools, but it was the statue itself that chose to speak. We only listened." Her humility struck a chord, and she became a symbol of the quiet hands that serve without seeking recognition. Months later, when the Basilica prepared to place the statue formally back in its chapel, the event drew tens of thousands. The Pope himself presided, though his homily was brief. He stood before the scarred marble, lifted his eyes to the Virgin and the Child, and said only, "She fell, but she revealed her heart. May we do the same." The crowd wept as one. Bells rang. The statue was lifted carefully, its scars shining under the lights, and placed again on its pedestal. From that day on, the chapel was never empty. Morning, noon, and night, footsteps echoed softly on the marble floor. Pilgrims knelt. Tourists paused. Locals slipped in on their way home from work. Some prayed, some only stood. All left quieter. The legacy of the fall stretched far beyond Rome. Around the world, people spoke of the story. Families kept copies of the parchment translations on their tables. The phrase, "Do not be afraid," was written on classroom chalkboards, hospital walls, and kitchen doors. In a world often heavy with fear, the words felt like a breath of fresh air. The statue had been cracked, but not destroyed. The cracks had become part of its beauty, a reminder that even stone can carry fragility, and through that fragility, reveal something greater. People no longer saw it as perfect marble, flawless and untouchable. They saw it as a vessel that had carried their ancestors' voices and now carried their own. As the seasons turned, the vigils continued. Candles still burned on the steps. Roses still appeared without asking, and the scent still drifted on certain nights when no flowers were near. Some said it was imagination. Others said it was grace. Whatever the truth, people kept coming. In the end, the fall of the Virgin Mary and baby Jesus statue at St. Peter's Basilica was not remembered as tragedy. It was remembered as revelation. A crack had opened, and inside was not emptiness but love, layered in paper, beads, and wood. Inside was the reminder that faith and fear, grief and gratitude are carried not only by people, but by the symbols they create. The statue had stood for centuries as stone. Now it stood as story. And in that story, people found themselves.